Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How you doing, George?
Hi, Terrence. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey, George.
Hi, Loretta. How are you?
How are you? I'm good. How about yourself?
Good, good.
Good to see you.
Here we are again.
Yes, we are.
Hello.
All right, everyone. Good evening. My name is Councilman Chris Johnson from the 7th District. I'd like to welcome everyone at home to the March Finance and Economic Development Committee. Before we jump into the agenda, I would just like my colleagues to take the opportunity to introduce themselves. We'll start with the, I guess we have the third district councilwoman, and we'll go up from there.
Hi, I'm Councilwoman Zanthia Alva, represent the 3rd District. Thank you.
We have anybody from the 5th district?
Good evening, everyone. This is Councilwoman Brigida Fields from the 5th District. Thank you.
I believe we have some a member from the 8th district.
Hi, Nathan Field, 8th District City Councilman.
And I believe we also have on the line at-large members.
Good evening, James. James Spadola at large.
Okay. And Councilmember Spadola, it seems like you have two connections in, so you're like double voice. So maybe WITN can work with you on that. All right.
I will figure it out.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have another at-large council member?
Loretta Walsh, Council at Large.
Okay. And actually, let me go back. We do have the vice chair of the committee, council member Michelle Harlee. Would you like to say hi?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Yes, Michelle Harlee, and I represent the 4th Councilmatic District. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, I believe we have Council President on the line as well.
Hello, everyone. Trippi Congo, Council President. Thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone taking the time, and as members, if members do come in, we'll make sure to introduce them as well to the public. We do have somewhat of a busy agenda this evening, so this is a busy time of year, of course, in the finance world and budgetary world with the city. So I do want to cut to the chase. The first item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2021 second quarter expenditure report overview. And do we have a representative from the Office of Management and Budget here to speak on that item?
Yes, we do. Daniel Owens, I'm a budget analyst. Also, the budget director is also on the call, Robert Greco.
Okay. So whichever one of you gentlemen want to take it first, the floor is yours.
Okay, Dan, go ahead. You have the document. And Councilman, can we share the screen, or do we have to ask ITN to do that? We have a one-page summary.
WITN will need to do that. I think they have it, right? No, that's the CAFR.
There it is.
There we go.
Okay. Okay.
Excellent.
I'm sorry, Chair, who's speaking now?
That's Director Rob Greco.
Gotcha. Okay, no problem.
Okay, gotcha. All right. Okay, is everything up that you need?
Yeah, so Dan Owens will go through the presentation.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Good evening, council members. I'm Daniel Owens in the budget office. Basically, what this report shows is city code makes us report certain expenditure categories that, as of the end of the second quarter, that have been spent at least, that have had 75% or more of their budget spent by the end of the second quarter, which was December 31st. So this is just a list of certain account items by department, which are at least 75% of budget as of the end of the second quarter. And you can see there are 6 total. I'll just briefly go through all of them, and we can, if you have any questions, let me know. In the treasurer's office, the last pay period before the quarter ended, 1 employee worked overtime and they didn't have any overtime budgeted. So that's what happened with the treasurer. And L&I, they have a vacancy at the position that normally does a lot of their planning review stuff. They're using a consultant right now instead. So as you can see, as of the end of the second quarter, they have spent roughly 82% of their total budget for the year. In the fire department, there are 2 things. One of them is their overtime, which they had spent 75% of by the end of the second quarter. Couple reasons for that. We had the people out with COVID required more overtime. The new contract, there were a lot of retirements the last few months, so they just had to use more overtime essentially. Their special events overtime, which is a separate line, they had a weather emergency December 17th. Normally we don't budget that sort of thing for the fire department for special events. It happened one time. It was $2,500 in overtime in December. And in the police department, there are two big ones. The first one, special events overtime. As you can see, by the end of the second quarter, we had spent almost the entire budget. We spent 97% of it. Basically, we hosted the Democratic National Convention, as you all know. That was not budgeted for. And also the post-election, the few days when then President-elect Biden and Vice President Harris were here in Wilmington, there were a few big weeks of a lot of overtime with special events and during that period. And lastly, the consultants for the crime center for the neighborhood cameras, they've already paid 77% of the budget line, but they're done for FY 2021. So that's why they were a little ahead of, they were at least 75% only halfway through the year. That's a brief summary. I see a couple hands up if anyone has any questions for us, the budget office.
Okay, actually, thank you very much, Mr. Owens. And actually, one question that's just right off the top from that I had upon reviewing this report is the police overtime. I understand that these were circumstances out of our control. Is there headway with getting reimbursement, either from the federal government or the DNC?
I will defer to, I believe Rob or Tanny's on the line might have a better idea about that than I would.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And so the Chief Tracy and I have been working on reimbursement diligently on from at least the Democratic National Committee. So we have been making some headway. We just sent some of our backup documentation as early as 2 weeks ago. So we have every confidence that we'll get reimbursed, at least for that.
Do any of my colleagues have questions? I'm trying to look at the order, the way it comes up on my screen. I believe Councilwoman Oliver, you had your hand up first.
No, I'm at the Councilwoman Walsh. I'm looking at it. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. I had the wrong screen. All right, Councilwoman Walsh.
Thank you. Tanny, you just said, at least for that, when you were referring to the federal or the money coming from the DNC for the reimbursement,
Yes.
for the president and vice president.
Mhm.
What does that mean? He's going to be president for 4 years. He's going to be here a lot. Does that mean that we're not going to ask for reimbursement every time he visits here?
No, so we're talking about two different coverages. First, for the DNC, we were sort of like the satellite center for the national party when they had the national party here. And so that's a different ask, and that goes straight to the Democratic Party. The other part, when the president comes to town, that's on the federal level. And council member, I have to tell you, just from knowing this from when he was vice president, those anytime he comes into the city of Wilmington, those are not reimbursable funds. So those are costs that we have typically had to eat, at least during the whole time he was with the Obama administration.
Well, I have to say, I'm actually surprised to hear that, because I don't think that was portrayed to us that way back then.
Yeah.
It was always, we're going to get that money back because we were not required to provide that service, but we were asked to participate.
Yeah, the best of my knowledge, we never received a reimbursement for those funds for when anytime we needed to provide coverage from when he would arrive in the city of Wilmington. That was something that we had to eat that cost. And, you know, at that time he was vice president, but now that he's president, it could go up significantly. You're right.
Well, I think we need to investigate this a little bit, because I seem to recall the previous administration supposedly, some bills they paid, some bills they didn't pay. And, but from many articles that I read, anytime that president was in a town, their administration always billed the town for extra coverage that their town police department had to provide. So, I mean, I don't think we should just blow it off. I think we should, sincerely sit down with some of the president's people and say, look, you know how tiny our town is. And we want him here as much as he possibly could be because it helps us with tourist spotting.
Yeah, so I will have Chief Tracy follow up on detail coverage, because that's exactly what it is. We shut down the streets. We make sure that the perimeter is secure in conjunction with the federal agent. So I will check on that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Councilwoman Oliver, I believe you're next.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to basically mention the same thing that Councilwoman Walsh. I can see, I'm just thinking the Biden campaign should reimburse us the DNC some of that funding, because that was a lot of money, and we know he's not going to stop coming here at some point. So I guess my sentiments are the same, that we should be reimbursed some of that money. As you said, I mean, that's a lot of overtime, and they had plenty of money. So I think that is a conversation. I guess I'm reiterating what she said. That is a conversation that needs to take place, because that's a lot for a small city like ours not to be reimbursed some of that funding. I mean, and he already, he has special agents with him anyway. Now the city's just, supplying all the, providing all the extra officers, and maybe that's not even necessary because he already has special detail. But I just think that conversation definitely needs to be taking place. Thank you.
Understood.
Councilman Spadola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay? Thank you.
Yes, I can.
It is I know it is a long time and a long-term problem that a lot of municipalities have in terms of chasing down the Secret Service or the feds for reimbursement when a president comes to town. So good luck with that, Danny. I do think it's something that we need to get in front of now, because the bill's only going to get bigger. But separately, I want to touch on the DNC racking up the bill. For all intents and purposes, if we look at the DNC as a third-party organization coming to town, setting up a big event, is that the city's policy, generally speaking, that they rack up a big bill and then we cross our fingers and hope we can get reimbursed?
No, for the DNC, this was a one-time event for us. The DNC has never had their national committee held here in Delaware. So this is a different animal altogether. The one we're dealing with, the detail for the federal agents, that's just our conversation with the White House. But this one is actually with the national party. So, it's supposed to be in Milwaukee. Obviously, because of COVID, that didn't happen, and the satellite party occurred here in Wilmington. So, this is an ask right to the party.
Sure, and I understand. But so focusing on the ask to the party, I guess what I'm getting at is, I hope we weren't cutting the DNC any breaks that we would in any other third-party organization.
No, we've been on it from the time, we in the meetings, we stated that we needed to get reimbursed. So we're continuing to work on that. I know Chief Tracy has had at least probably 3 or 4 meetings.
Okay.
And just to give you an idea, I believe, and don't quote me on the number, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood about $200,000 in terms of what we spent in overtime.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Is there any other? And at this time, I'd like to recognize Council Member McCoy She's on the line as well. Is there any other questions specifically on the expenditure report? All right. Well, at that point, I appreciate OMB for stepping in and giving us comprehensive report. We definitely look forward to seeing the next quarter report. Thank you. All right.
Thanks for having us. Have a good evening, everybody.
All right. Thank you. All right. Turning to the rest of the agenda, I just wanted to believe we have the overview of the fiscal year 2020 CAFR for the period ending June 30th, 2020. And I believe that we have Finance Director Brett Taylor here. Is this going to be you on this one?
Yes, sir. And George Fernaris from Belfint, Lyons, and Shuman is also going to join me to talk a little bit about the representation of the financial statements.
Okay, I appreciate it. And for those members, especially the new members, you should have received the CAFR report. You should have received it in your email. Please let us know if you have not. We can provide it as such. But do you need to share the screen?
I believe I sent over a PowerPoint presentation. There's going to be 3 or 4 slides, right?
Okay. All right. Excellent. Well, the floor is yours.
Great. You can go to the next slide. Well, as you know, every year the city produces a comprehensive annual financial report and a single audit. These are requirements under GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, and we attempt to make a fair representation of the status of our financial performance as of June 30th, 2020. It takes a little bit of effort to get these this financial statement in order, primarily because we work on in the case of a general fund, we work on a modified accrual basis, and in the cases of the other funds, we work on an accrual basis. We allow a 90 days for us to, if revenue is coming in post June 30th based on billings in the previous year, we accumulate those and accrue those back into the financial statements. So it takes us a little bit to work through. What you'll find is in the comprehensive annual financial statements is a full picture of our general fund, our water sewer fund, and many of our special funds. In addition, you'll see breakdowns of our component units. These are smaller city subsidiaries that we work with, and we have to account for them. The auditor's responsibility is to go through the financials, make sure that we have accounted for our transactions appropriately, and to be able to fashion them into a set of financial statements. Likewise, they also look for any material weaknesses or deficiencies in our internal controls. That's what George is going to talk about after I present the financial picture. For 2020, I'm going to focus tonight on 3 areas. One is general fund, the other is water sewer fund, and then our long-term debt obligations. The reason I'm focusing on general fund and water sewer fund is that they are our largest components. Certainly, you know, the invitation is open for us to sit with any of the council members to discuss the other particulars within the CAFR itself. We would be happy to answer questions about some of those units. On the general fund side, I'm going to show you two items. One is the general fund balance sheet. We ended the year with $75.9 million in assets. We had liabilities to the tune of $12.9 million. These liabilities are everything from, accounts payable to other payments that we have to make out of the general fund. We have something we call deferred revenues. And what this is that these are revenues that we would recognize in FY20, but have not taken delivery of the receipts as of the close of the books. In this case, or at that time, the close of the accrual period, which was roughly 90 days. With that said, the deferred revenues here are property and wage taxes and citations and fines. These are accounted for both as, on the liability side, but also in terms of the asset side, just in terms of our accounts receivable. We, after we assess for the assets, liabilities, and deferred revenues, we get a fund balance. We are happy to report that our fund balance increased by $1.3 million this year. In FY 2019, we were at $46.6 million in fund balance. The FY20 resulted in a fund balance of 47.9. For all things considered, given the fact that we had the period between March and June, we were really in the eye of the storm, so to speak, in terms of COVID-19, with a lot of uncertainty about where it was going. We actually managed to hold our own. Of the 47.9 million, 16.3 million is reserved for the budget reserve account. We also make advancements to the motor vehicle fund for items that have not taken delivery or long lead items of 2.8 million. And then we also have everything else once all of that occurs. Per our ordinance that we passed 2 years ago, we dropped the final, what was once considered unassigned, we dropped this into the tax stabilization fund. The tax stabilization fund is now at $28.7 million. Go to the next slide, please.
Brett, if you could go back to that slide.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk about the difference between the budget reserve account and the tax stabilization fund?
Really, the budget reserve account is there for significant and catastrophic issues that would necessitate for us to dip into the reserve. The tax stabilization is set aside so that we can make year-to-year decisions about meeting our operating obligations without having to impose new property taxes or other fees and charges. So
Sure.
Use the tax stabilization fund as a way of balancing your budget. The budget reserve account has some very specific limitations as to what you can draw it for. And of course, both require city council approval.
Okay. And what's the formula to determine what goes into the budget reserve account relative to the tax stabilization?
It's 10% of revenue from the for the prior year. For the upcoming budget year.
Is for what fund?
For the budget reserve account.
Okay. Thank you.
Go on to the next slide. Looking at the income statement, this is really kind of our P&L, our profit loss. We had revenues in 2020 of $167.2 million. The expenditures, we had spent $163.4 million, giving us a total surplus of $3.8 million. Now, we had some other financing sources and uses. involved here. What that entailed was really kind of interest costs affiliated with the financing sources. And of course, that would leave us with a change in fund balance of $1.3 million. The other things that were included in the financing sources, I just wanted to make a note. $2.8 million in CARES Act funding was put into the expenditure amount it's reflected in that amount, as well as in the revenues. The $3.4 million is in the other financing sources and uses. And this was $3.4 million that we had received as part of a bond anticipation note. That note was used to satisfy the Wilmington Housing Partnership obligation of $3.3 million. Also, the change in the financing sources uses included an accounting adjustment. What this was for is an integration of the internal service liability for information technology and communications. Last year, we decided to make the information systems, the IT department, its own department before it was included in the internal service fund. The internal service fund is a fund of indirect costs that we would spread across all of the departments. So instead of doing that, we made it its own standalone department. Because of a difference between the accrual basis of accounting and the modified accrual basis of accounting, we had to absorb $2 million. And this is a one-time accounting entry, a $2.1 million in when we brought their assets over, we had an unfunded liability and we needed to bring it over and we needed to satisfy that. So there is a little bit of a financing particular here. And I just wanted to make sure that we were transparent about what happened. If you go on to the next slide. Water sewer fund. Our current assets are about $421.2 million.
I had my hand up.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yes, Councilmember Harlee. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Director Taylor, as it relates to the $2.8 million in CARES Act revenue and expenditures, the reimbursements, can we get a copy of who those reimbursements went out to? And the reason why I'm asking that question is because I recall in a meeting previously discussing the CARES Act funds. And at that particular time, I think I recall those dollars going out to nonprofits. And at that particular time, again, it wasn't decided upon. And so now that we're past that point, it will be good to know who those agencies were that received reimbursements.
Yes, ma'am. We'd be happy to do that.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions about the general fund? Okay. Let's go on to the water sewer fund. The water sewer fund, as I had said.
Sorry, Director Taylor. I believe Chief of Staff Washington had her hand raised. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think that there is a little bit of confusion because the money that you're talking about that went out for the CARES to the nonprofit agencies, that was CARES funding that came out of real estate and housing out of CDBG. The money that Director Taylor is talking about this evening is the reimbursement CARES funding we received from Newcastle County.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Well, and just as a follow-up, Chief of Staff Washington, so it's just to make it easy for the public, so just like police costs, public works costs directly attributable to PPE and things like that?
That's correct. And any personnel costs and other things. Sure, it's a reimbursement for that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Excellent. I believe Chief of Staff, City Council Chief of Staff, Marshall Bathnight, you have a question?
I'm the Strategy and Policy Director, but I just wanted to mention too, a question for Brett is for the tax stabilization fund, is that all cash?
It is not all cash. I can get you the amount of money that would be all the portion that is cash. Keep in mind that it is the entry on the balance sheet, which is a mix of assets minus liabilities, and some of those assets are accounts receivable. We do make an adjustment for the deferred revenue, but we do a cash reconciliation, and I'd be happy to get that information to you.
Is there a follow-up, Ms. Bathnight, or no? Okay. And I believe Council Member Harlee has a follow-up question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief of Staff Washington, for the clarification. So you bringing me to a point of asking for both then. So it's just always good for us to know how these CARES Act funds are being dispersed. It comes up quite a bit in different conversations. So again, thanks for the clarification that that's from a different bucket. So if we can get a copy of how, what makes up, what's the detail for the 2.8, and then also from real estate and housing as well.
Sure, that's not a problem.
And I believe Councilwoman Zanthia Oliver, you have a question? Is that your hand raised? Or?
No, thank you.
No.
I guess no, thank
okay,
you.
They had your hand raised. Okay.
Yeah, my hand. I do have a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to. I guess Michelle's thinking that Councilwoman Harlee's thinking the same as I'm thinking. I just like to know about the CARES Act. I mean, where some of the funding is going, because as she said, we've been in meetings and someone has mentioned that on more than one occasion. So it just won't hurt. So I was going to mention the same thing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. We had I'm sorry, is it okay to talk?
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you.
Yeah, so we had the same question asked by Councilmember Gray, and we have prepared a response to her, and I will share it with both of you as well.
Okay.
I will share it with all the council. So it's probably good for all the council to see.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Director Taylor, you want to take it from here?
Thank you. In reference to, I was just looking while everyone was talking, Marshall, in reference to the cash position, the cash and cash equivalents for the general fund as of June 30th was 7.9 million. So not all of that is cash. However, keep in mind that we continually get cash coming in daily throughout the year, and it is enough to be able to cover our operating expenses. Okay.
Thanks.
Going back to the slides, the Water Sewer Fund. Water Sewer Fund had assets of $421.2 million. We did include, deferred amounts, as I explained earlier. These are amounts that we recognize but have not taken them on yet. In these two areas, we have a portion of the bond refunding, of a refunding that had occurred during the year, and a portion of the pension pension investments, and that leads us to a total asset base of $424.6 million. Looking at the balance sheet, deduct the liabilities of $247.4 million. Again, we had a small deferred amount under pensions of $307,000. And we come up with what we call the net position. You take the assets minus the liabilities, and the deferred amount and you get a net position of $176.8 million. This net position actually increased by $6.366 million. In FY 2019, it was at 170.4, 170.5. FY 20 was 176.8. This included changes in net investments in capital assets of $141.5 million. Now, what happens is, we take depreciation on the capital asset, but at the same time, we're acquiring new assets. And this is what the net investment would be. The operating and maintenance reserve, which is a set aside per the code, was $9.4 million. And then, as with the tax stabilization reserve, the balance of the funds after accounting for the assets minus liabilities and deferred amounts, and the net position reserves for the net investment and the operating and maintenance reserve, we get a rate stabilization reserve of $25.9 million. Go on to the next slide. The water sewer fund income statement, again, we had a net increase, in net position of $6.4 million. And of that, we had revenues of $78.8 million. Our expenditures were $73.3. We have non-operating revenues, and what this was interest expense for the bonds that we have to deduct. And then we had grants and contributions. Grants and contributions entailed we through the course of, particularly with the water treatment plant, we obtain federal and state grants for water quality issues and the like. Those were contributions of $6.5 million, leaving us with a net increase, again, an increase in net position of $6.4 million. Go on to the next slide. The long-term debt obligations, our city net general obligation debt decreased to $295.9 million. This was a decrease of $10 million. The water sewer projects had a net decrease in debt of $8.7 million. And overall, the government capital projects had a net decrease in debt of 1.3. So the city's governmental fund debt service payments of $16.3 million in fiscal year 20 were within the statutory debt limit of $29.3 million. So we have
the Director Taylor, I believe Councilwoman Harlee had a question, I believe, on this item.
Yeah, I did on the previous slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I wanted to catch it before you went too far.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so my question was regarding the deferred pensions. Real quick, I guess it's the previous slide on, if you go back. One more. Sorry, where you have the deferred amounts for pensions. So, so is that amount for pensions that they're projecting for retirees or to do what?
all this is we're not making any changes to any of the retirement plans or programs. All this is a when you hit June 30th, it's a timing issue for the transfer of monies into the water sewer fund. Out of the water sewer fund into the pension accounts. That's all that is. Again, this has no reflection on any change in retirees' pensions.
Okay, all right, thank you.
It's just a timing issue.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Director Taylor, for clearing that up.
Yep. This is long-term debt obligations was my last slide. There's plenty more. I could spend an hour going through the CAFR in full, like I said, we'd be happy to answer any questions post this meeting on anything in the CAFR. I do want to turn it over to George Fernaris. He's going to give you his overview of what he had seen during the engagement. George?
Okay, and I think Director Taylor, council member, Harlee still has a question. She has I believe one for you.
Yes. So I know that we had discussed the body cameras and purchasing the body cameras and also surveillance cameras. And I'm just curious to know what line item does that fall under in all of the different numbers, because I see that for the most part, you're sharing all the dollars at a high level. And I know that it's a lot of detail that is associated with these numbers, but I was just curious to know where does that fall at in these numbers that you're sharing?
The cost for the body cameras would be part of the normal operating budget, and that would be included in your expenditure lines under your, in this case, it would be on your income statement in terms of your department expenditures. If there was any revenue that had come in as a result of a federal grant, that would be booked in either, I believe it would be considered as part of the federal contributions in the general fund. So, part of it is revenue if it comes in through a federal grant, and the expenditures would be booked as an operating expense.
Okay, thank you. I just thought I would ask because again, there's no detail. So
yeah, this is a very, very high level overview, but it gives you a picture of our financial position, our overall financial performance. And if I was to say so, given the circumstances, to have net increases in your fund balance bodes very well for a city that's coming through.
I believe Mr. Greco from OMB has a.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that the budget amendment for the body cameras was the 2021 budget and not the 20 budget. And also the neighborhood cameras is also in the 2021 budget. This CAFR we're talking about here is the 2020 budget. So you wouldn't see it in this, even if the CAFR had a little bit more detail. It didn't happen in 2020. It's happened in 2021.
Okay. Even though we voted on it in 2020, it's not effective until 2021.
Correct.
Understood. Thank you.
Okay, I guess if there's
Mr.
nothing
Chair?
further, Director Taylor, if Mr.
Fernaris
is ready.
Hello, I'm George Fernaris. I'm with Belfint, Lyons, and Shuman. We're your independent outside auditors, and Michael Mast, who managed the audit job, is also with me today. And I have several documents to go over with you, but in the interest of your time, I'll try and make it as brief as I can, but please stop me if you have any questions. I believe that the documents that we dispersed, along with the other documents that Finance and Audit Department dispersed, have been sent to the members of the committee. So I'll refer to those documents, but my summary of the results of the audit, which is a one-page document that you all should have, I'll pretty much follow that, and then we can refer to the CAFR, the single audit report, and to the governance letter as needed, if that's okay. So in the summary of the results, we start off by talking about the communications letter. The communications letter is a short summary of the audit, and it details our responsibilities as auditors, your responsibilities as managers, and those charged with governance of the city. So in that communications letter, we are required by the professional standards to inform you about certain things having to do with the audit and certain results of the audits. Now, every audit, every financial statement, the CAFR is no exception, has certain estimates that are used to prepare the financial statements. And the most important estimates that you need to keep in mind when you are reading the CAFR and the financial statements is that accounts receivable are subject to allowances for doubtful accounts. That means that what you bill out for property taxes, for water and sewer, and for other revenues are subject to allowances, which the finance department estimates, and we audit the reasonableness of those allowances. So the point is that you can bill out $100, but if your history shows that you only collect $90 of that 100, then we don't want to recognize too much or an amount that's unrealistic. So accounts receivable are important, and the allowances are important estimates. Also, some of the largest numbers in the CAFR are the pensions and the OPEB costs. So those, the reporting for those is subject to estimates for the lives of the pensioners, future returns on investment and such. The self-insurance funds, the city is self-insured or partly self-insured for healthcare, general liability, workers' comp. Those liabilities in those funds are also subject to estimates. The actuaries will use the actuarial determinations for those liabilities that are based on their best estimate of what the future holds in those funds. And depreciation of your fixed assets. Depreciation is based on the estimate of the useful lives of your infrastructure assets, your vehicles, your buildings, etc. And then those are laid out. Some of those estimates are laid out in the notes to the financial statements of the CAFR. The most sensitive ones, I think the most important ones are the pension liabilities and the OPEB liabilities, just by virtue of their size. And you'll see in the CAFR, if you read through it, that the pension and OPEB disclosures that the city is required to make, they're 10 or 12 pages long just by themselves. So they're pretty important, and they would merit your attention. So other things in the governance letter, we didn't experience any unusual difficulties in performing the audit. If we had, we would be required to inform you of them. There are some, attached to that letter are some uncorrected misstatements. These are errors and adjustments that we came up with during the audit, but mostly because of their small size, we decided not to make them, and the financial statements are not affected in any way by not including them.
Mr. Fernandez.
Sorry, go ahead.
If you mind, I'll just ask you in terms of corrective action. I understand there are some areas, but tracking year by year, does your company look back to see if corrective actions that were recommended in fiscal year 19 were improved?
Yeah.
Is that part of the process?
Yeah, if I can, let me skip ahead a little bit. The Other report that you have is the single audit report. And in the single audit report, there are findings for the current year and also the current status of prior year findings from 19 or from prior years. So the answer to your question is yes. I can skip ahead to that now, or I can just do it in order, whatever you would like.
You can do it in order. It was a question
Okay.
that popped out.
Okay,
in my head when
we'll
reviewing
get
it.
to it though. And I'll skip a lot of this boring auditing stuff so that we can move to the things that you have more interest in. Now, also in the communication letter, if we had any disagreements with management, we would be required to report them to you. Also, we did not. And there was there was one new GASB pronouncement on construction period interest that was implemented this year. And there are a couple of new standards that we will be focusing on for next year and that the finance department will be focusing on. So that's it for the governance letter pretty much. In the audit of the financial statements, the CAFR report that Director Taylor just went through, the from cover to cover, the product is finance departments. Our responsibility is on page 1 of that CAFR document, and that is the opinion letter. So in our opinion, the financial statements and the financial statements of the city are fairly stated, and we've given you an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion in layman's terms. So what you see there in the package is fairly stated, and it fairly represents the results of fiscal year 2020. And there are a lot of other reports that aren't part of the basic financial statements that are included in the CAFR package, and our auditor's report addresses them. There are the combining schedules of funds in the back part of the report and management's discussion and analysis. They're what's called required supplementary information. We don't specifically audit them, but they are in agreement with everything that's in the audited financial statements. So our opinion discloses that as well. So the city ended fiscal year 2020, just to make it brief, with a clean opinion on the financial statements. Again, if it was other than a clean opinion, we would be required to report it to you. And getting to your earlier question, the report that presents current year findings and the follow-up on prior year findings is the report in your package that is referred to as the single audit report. And let me open it up a second and we'll go over that too. There were 5 findings in this report. You have, well, actually 6 findings, 1 material weakness and 5 significant deficiencies. Now, material weakness is obviously more serious than the deficiencies. So if you have that in front of you, on the single audit report is required for a couple of reasons. One, it's required by government auditing standards. And because you're a municipal government you have a higher level of responsibility, and we as auditors auditing your books have a higher level of responsibility, and it's set out in the government auditing standards. There are two auditors' reports in this single audit package. In one, we give an opinion on the internal control over your financial reporting and your compliance with laws and regulations. And the second report is specifically on the federal funds that the city received this year. So on page 7 of that report, we'll skip through the auditor's letters, but page 7 of that report details all of the federal funds by program and by grant and grant year. The city received in fiscal year 2020 almost $18 million of federal funds. And on my summary, you'll see that those funds, we're required to audit those funds that are determined to be major programs. Generally, that's the largest programs. It included the coronavirus funds that you received for fiscal year 2020. Also included the summer food service program, which was expanded because of the COVID epidemic, and it was much larger than it has been in prior years. National Fish and Wildlife Grant Agreement, which was tied in with the wetlands project, and then also highway planning and construction funds, which was the fourth major program. So those are listed there.
And Mr. Fernandez,
Yes.
if you mind, I just want to delve into the big grants. So the CDBG grants and the HUD grants. Your company was able to look over those because I know the question came up earlier, and those grants were in compliance. The city's doing what they have to do to make sure that the nonprofits receiving the grants are doing what they need to do.
Well, we audited the CDBG program for fiscal year 19. And the way the single audit works is that some audits, because of their size, are audited every year. And then other programs, because they're smaller, are audited on a rotating basis. CDBG was not audited for fiscal year 2020 as a major program. Nothing came to our attention. Now, we did audit those funds for the financial statement presentation. So it's not that they weren't audited, they were audited, but they were not audited for compliance with the federal rules as these four major programs were. So I can try and answer any questions you might have about CDBG, but it was not audited as a major program this year, FY 2020.
Okay, thank you.
See in the, I guess it's page 8, let's see. 1 second. The Community Development Block Grant Program is on page 7 of the report, and the city received about 2.2 million of federal funds in that program this year. And like I said, it had been audited on a rotating basis in the prior year. So it was time to schedule other funds to be audited. And the way—
Mr. Fernandez, I believe Councilwoman Harlee has a question.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Councilmember Harlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Fernandez, you mentioned that you determine how you audit based on the size. So is that based on employees or is it based on budget? Like, how do you determine this size?
Yes, it's based on dollars spent. And we're required to cover 40% of the federal funds spent, at least 40%. So in this year, we had almost $18 million of federal funds. So we're required to cover at least 40% of that amount. And we selected the major programs, those 4 major programs whose expenditures totaled more than 40% of the $18 million. So I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead. You can finish.
There's also, in addition to the dollars spent, we're required to go through a risk analysis of those federal programs. So for example, if we had if we have programs where we had findings in the prior year, and or if we had brand new programs, or programs that change significantly from one year to the next, those are factors that might indicate a higher risk program. So once we choose the 40% of the dollars to be that have been spent, we could be required to audit some more programs based on those risk factors. So those are the 3 of those 4 programs were chosen based on their size. And the 4th one, which I believe is the highway planning and construction, was based on risk factors. Another risk factor is a program that hasn't been audited ever before or hasn't been audited in a long time. And I believe that was the criteria we used for the highway planning program.
Okay, thanks for that explanation. Do you know what those other 3 programs were? You said there were 4.
Yeah, there were 4. Summer Food Service Program, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation Grant, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and the Highway Planning and Construction Grant.
Okay, I see this. Are they listed on this report on page 7?
They are individually on that report, but if you look at my summary, the 1-page summary of results of the audit, they're listed at the bottom of that 1-pager.
Perfect, thank you.
And you can find the amounts. With these programs, you might have more than 1 year open at a time. So these programs will have more than 1 line. And they're organized by these program numbers that you see on my summary.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the clarification, Mr. Mayor. I believe we have another question, Councilwoman Oliver.
Yes, Mr. Chair. No, thank you. I just want to tell Mr. that I think their company does a great job. The summary really explained a lot of things to me, so I didn't have to go through a lot. I just wanted to give credit where credit's due and just keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's all Michael. Michael did everything, actually. Okay. Now, you wanted to discuss the findings, which is they start on page 13 of the single audit report.
Yes.
Now we start off with the material weakness, which has to do with the financial reporting close process that finance goes through every year to get the financial statements put together. Now, this area was an issue last year too, and actually the year before that. Like I said earlier, our responsibility is to audit the financial statements, and it's the city's responsibility to put together the financial statements. So in an ideal situation, we would come in to do the audit and the financial statements wouldn't require any adjustments. Well, you almost never get to an ideal situation. And in this case, we had to make a number of large adjustments as a result of our audit procedures. And we brought those to the attention of the finance department, which then made the adjustments. So you can see there were year-end adjustments to adjust for construction in progress, others having to do with the internal service fund consolidation that Director Taylor talked about earlier, and other large entries. Now, in order to make the financial statements correct for presentation. Now, although we don't like to see large entries like this, large adjustments like this, I will say that the number of adjustments that had to be made this year went down from last year. But due to the size of these entries, we felt that they constitute a material weakness because of their size. And our recommendation is that the finance department further enhance their closing procedures at year end, and that part of that process involves going over these adjustments that I just summarized and making sure the same things don't happen again in the future. The second item has to do with the Integrated Technologies Department, and they are in charge of the controls over your data processing environment. And there are 4 items in this finding, 4 conditions. And I won't go through them at all. I won't go through all of them, but again, as with the first finding, this is a repeat finding, but it's another area where the city and the IT department have reduced the number of findings, the number of observations, and the IT director is chipping away at findings in this area. It's still not perfect. There's still openings in your systems that that need to be addressed, and they are addressing them. For the IT director had engaged an outside consulting firm to evaluate your systems for weaknesses. But it's one of those areas where you need to be vigilant continuously. When you solve one problem, there's some new technology and some new risks that develop over time, and you have to, the city has to stay on top of it. We aren't experts in the IT area, but we do review it every year. We review the reports of your outside consultants, and we do testing around the IT area as well. So, you know, you have the city has to realize that it's storing a lot of valuable data on its systems. You have tax data of wage tax system, the property tax system, even the parking tickets have a very valuable personal information stored on them, the HR systems. And, you know, the resources have to be devoted to protecting that information.
And Mr. Fernandez, just as a high level overview, is this something that can, when you talk about resources, is it just going to take more money and investment, or could it be simple changes such as 2-factor authentication for, you know, certain IT products or something like that? Like, is it a simple fix, or is it more long-term capital investment fix?
It's I guess a combination of both.
Okay.
You need, I mean, certainly there has to be funding, adequate funding in the budget to get things done. But some of them are simple fixes. I'll give you an example. What we do in our firm, and what I know that say the state of Delaware does, is they have education programs, which are basically emails that are sent out to users on the systems and alerts them to the latest phishing emails that are being used, or it gives them information on what type of activities to stay away from on the systems, what type of attachments not to open, things like that. They're more, not very expensive to implement. And there are other things like keeping up with the most current software that are more expensive.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and there, like I said, this finding was, we have 4 bullet points in it this year. A couple of years ago, it was probably 8. So IT is chipping away at the issues there. Number 3 is also a repeat finding, has to do with, it's actually an IT issue. In the payroll system, they have what they call a super user password, which your software, I think it's built into it. And the super user password allows the person who has it to make changes that can't be tracked. So I could go in, I could change my pay rate, for example, and give myself a raise. Now, we didn't see any evidence of anything like that happening, and we did testing in the payroll area, and you have other controls in your system that prevents things like that happening. But it's a risk area, and we want HR to be informed and to have that in mind. If they get a different payroll system, it shouldn't have that capability.
Thank you very much for covering that.
Number 4, we've got it's a combination of human resources and the police department. And again, it's a repeat finding, vacation and comp time tracking. There are 2 systems, one in the police department, one in the HR department, and they don't reconcile. The 2 departments don't get together to reconcile these amounts, and it becomes an issue every year when we're doing the audit. So our recommendation is that they sit down, the 2 departments sit down and work something out where they do a regular reconciliation of these balances. The compensatory time is millions of dollars of information, of millions of dollars of liability to the city, and it should be in balance. The record should be in agreement and consistent. The 5th finding there has to do with extra duty billing. As you probably know, the city does bill for police department resources, like you were talking about earlier, for the Democratic National Committee. Police are used for these special events, and it's not just that event, but you might have construction activities where the contractor needs to have police to direct traffic. It could be festivals or other events where they need off-duty police. The city bills for these services and should be collecting what they bill for. And we found some issues with the billing and collection of these services. The services were provided, and the city had fallen behind on the billing. So it's about $300,000 worth of bills that were not sent out as of June 30th. So we bring that to your attention and the finance department's attention. And a system is being put in place that will hopefully capture these on a timely basis and make sure you're billing and collecting what you are due for these extra services.
Now, Mr. Fernandez, again, you look at kind of a tight fiscal restraints that we have right now? Is this the billing challenge? Is this something which we're going to need more this long-term investment, or is it something maybe we can
No,
change
I
some
think
things?
I think there's a low-tech solution to it, and I know that Director Taylor is already working on it because we discussed this while the audit was going on. So he's made some changes in his department as far as organizing that activity so that it's a matter of putting some procedures in place. It's not going to cost any money or not much money to enforce this.
Okay. And Chief of Staff Washington?
Yeah, so what we've discussed, at one point in time, the special events permitting process was a centralized process where anybody who wanted a special event, all of the funds would go to cultural affairs before your event would get approved. Now it's sort of disparate where it's going to different departments. And now we have to bring that back to centralizing that, where all the funding is coming back into cultural affairs and the special events processing. And I think that will help a long way in making sure that everything is billed properly.
Okay. And I guess my question is to the Chief of Staff is, now that I guess we have a break with special events really during COVID, should we maybe by this summer have a new system in place when we'll start having more live events?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's actually probably an easy fix. I don't know how we got away from it, but I mean, it's just a matter of, it's actually a team of departments that come together around the table. Well, they'll probably be Zooming now, and just reviewing all the special events and checking off whether they've meeting certain criteria and submitted their money and their paperwork that's required.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Excellent. And Councilwoman Oliver, I believe you're next, or no?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to basically, you already asked the question I was going to ask due to special events, because we haven't really been using special events. What was going to be changed? You basically just asked that. But Mr. Chair, we had already talked, and I told you I had to leave a little early. So good meeting, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yes. Okay. You may be excused. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Okay, and then number 6 is the last current year finding. This is more of this is a recommendation to also tighten up procedures. There wasn't any specific error that was found in the transfer tax area. However, we made a recommendation that the Revenue Division revise its process for handling the payments. And this is getting a little bit into the weeds, but when a transfer tax payment is made to the city, it's done at the cashier. And usually somebody is coming over from a law office with documents and a check. And sometimes it's an exempt transfer transaction. And the cashier is not in a position to audit these payments to make sure the check is for the right amount and to make sure that the exemptions are properly taken. And our recommendation is that the city put into effect a review process after the fact on these transfer tax payments. There's no evidence that there are a lot of problems in this area or errors, but some of these large office building transfers, for example, if an exemption is incorrectly taken, the city could lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in one transaction. So there should be more of an overview process, and I've talked with Director Taylor about it. They are working on revising the process dealing with the transfer taxes. So that's it for the current year findings. Now, each director that these findings were addressed to is required to provide a response. And those responses are included as part of this report at the back end. And you can read those responses. They're mostly in agreement and have listed their plans to address the findings. As you asked, Mr. Chairman, as you asked earlier, the current status of the prior year findings are starting on page 23 of this report. I won't go into them other than to say that the findings that we just went over are mostly repeat findings. We had similar findings last year, except for there were 3 findings reported last year that were not findings this year. And that's progress. And those prior year findings are summarized in the report. They're not totally repeated. And the current status is also summarized. So if it's been fully addressed, we say so. If it's been partially addressed, we say so. And if it's not addressed and it's a repeat finding, we have that reference in there too. So I think that's everything for me. One more thing on the findings. There were no findings this year in the federal funds audit. So that's also a good positive thing. Any questions for me or Michael? We're here to answer anything.
No, Mr. Fernandez, I believe you were very nimble, and I believe you answered questions as we went along, which I think was perfect while they were on my colleagues' minds. Now, and when you do this audit, just to kind of go over the process, do you work with City Auditor Terrence Williams as well, or it's a separate audit, or you work completely separate from Mr. Williams?
No, actually, City Auditor Williams is our main contact for the audit. Normally, in a normal year, we would be camped out in his conference room for a few months doing this audit, and we've kept in touch with him as well as the finance department through the conduct of this year's audit as well, to the best of our abilities under the circumstances.
I think BLS, George and Mike and their team has done a really good job under the circumstances, as well as Brett Taylor and the finance department as well. Everyone knows with the pandemic, we've had a number of different challenges, but they were very efficient, as far as what was under their control. There were some things that were just out of their control, out of the city's control, and they had to deal with it as best possible as far as like dealing with component units, blended component units, and getting information from them. But for the most part, things went well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, City Auditor.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to add one thing. As we've discussed with city management, we're your auditors year round. It's not just at audit time. So if there are issues that come up during the year, feel free to get in touch with us through Auditor Williams, and we'll try and work with you when we can during the year. I know that we encourage the finance department to contact us during the year for any questions that we can answer during the year, so that they don't become issues when we come back for the year-end audit.
And if I could just say, BLS did just a very professional job. They gave us a lot of great advice. We're going to take that advice under advisement for this year. We're just going to try to do better in terms of our compliance in particular to the findings that they had mentioned, but also in terms of our timing and making sure that our transactions are appropriate. I do want to give a shout out to Terrence and his team. I do want to say that the Treasurer's Office has been very helpful in helping us get through the close in the last 2 months. And, I want to give a shout out to my staff at the Department of Finance. I believe me, I'm not the one who puts this together. It's a cast of 100. And we want to make sure that everybody, I recognize that they did a great job this year.
Thank you very much, Director Taylor. Well, Mr. Fernandez, unless you or Michael has anything else, I think that actually completes the agenda items. I think you definitely, your team has done a more than able job of attacking this big project, obviously doing it remotely. So I believe I speak for the rest of my colleagues. We are very thankful for this work. And of course, as we review it, especially with our policy team, if we have any additional questions, we'll let either you, Director Taylor, or Chief of Staff Washington know. Okay.
Thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Thank you.
Chairman Johnson, your team, if you have questions, BLS, they will be presenting the CAFR single audit at the next audit review committee meeting as well. So that's another opportunity if you have follow-up questions.
Okay.
Is that going to be remote also?
Oh,
Yes, it will be, George.
No sandwiches?
no.
George.
Sorry.
I believe there is a question from Councilmember Harlee.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Floor is yours.
So do we automatically get an invite to the review? The meeting that you just mentioned, the finance committee?
No, it's a
The
public
audit review.
Audit review. Yeah.
It's-
Anybody can attend. Yeah.
It's a public meeting.
Yeah, I was just, so emails go out.
To the audit review committee members that go out, there are members from council who are on the committee, and they will definitely get it. And the process owners who will be, whose audits will be presented at that time will be there, as well as BLS going through the CAFR and single audit. But it'll be posted, so if anyone wants to participate, they'll be able to log in.
Okay, all right,
All right.
thank you.
All right. Well, I believe that does complete our agenda. I think we covered a lot in a short amount of time, especially during this busy time of year. I know it is, of course, in the finance world, a very busy time. So I appreciate all the work everyone's doing. And if there's no further items, I don't believe there is, then at this time I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Okay.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? All right. Well, I sincerely appreciate again everyone who attended, both as a part of this and also taking place at home. Our next scheduled meeting will be April, the first Monday in April. Don't have the exact date, but we'll keep the public informed. We are, of course, moving into budget season soon. The mayor's budget address, I believe, is March 18th.
That's correct.
Chief of Staff Washington. Okay,
Yeah.
March 18th. So please tune in for that as well. It will be live streamed on, I believe, Facebook and YouTube, and also WITN. So that's a very important time. So please tune in, and we'll see everyone in April. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, staff.